Hi everyone, welcome back. This is Marinol from the Brown Gull Trekker and Peak Explorations. Today is going to be a topic that is a continuation of the series that I'm going over with the podcast On My Way from a Lawyer to a Mountain Nomad. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the topic of aging and the idea of going out for an adventure while thinking whether it's too late in terms of time. And we went over certain reasons why it would be the best time to go out there at the age of 40 and up. So today, what I would like to discuss is the financial aspect of things. It's actually going to be a much longer set of episodes because the topic is quite huge in terms of the different aspects to it. So as part of the series on what fears I have in terms of living my lawyer work to become a mountain nomad, I think the one obvious fear is the money part. So I want to begin this segment by going over some of the mindsets that come along with this topic. To actually be able to overcome the fear of finances, you'd have to go through the process of sorting out in your head sort of the kind of lifestyle that you're looking after and you're looking at in the future in terms of quitting a stable job and having something much more unstable and much more unpredictable. So I would like to start out with what is entailed in terms of how one actually formulate the idea of becoming a mountain nomad and having less financial resources in doing so. I think I want to say that, in all honesty, the mindset has evolved over time. It's not an overnight thing, just like any of the other fears. So I think this is a one that requires a number of years to process and to accept. Some of the mindsets that I would want to note in terms of how one is able to overcome the fear of finances in actually going after your passion that is much less lucrative in terms of pay is to actually value the idea of less is more. Less is more is all about minimalism. It's about basically downsizing your possessions and figuring out what is the most valuable aspect for you in terms of your life. For me, to become a mountain nomad, it would be a requirement for me to know how to live minimally in terms of possessions. So truth be told, I actually had a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and I had it for 2 years in Washington, D.C. I was a homeowner in Washington, D.C. for a decade, and that was something that I did 11 years ago, where I bought a house anticipating that I was going to live in that house for a long time, pay it off fully, and be married and have family. So the 3-bedroom, 2-bath actually was something that was envisioned for a dream that was completely different from what I would like to do now. And obviously, to get a 3-bedroom, 2-bath for the purposes of having a family makes a lot of sense. So, however, life didn't give me that sort of road in terms of my life, and so I had to shift gears at some point. So one thing about minimalism is that you realize that the space that you're in, the bigger the space, the more likely you're going to have clutter, the more likely you're going to possess things, because it seems to me it's human nature for us to fill the space with an object or something, otherwise it's dead space. And I think in a way, sometimes when it's too much space for us, we tend to feel a little bit more lonely and more sort of out of sync. And having more stuff in our space makes it a little bit more sort of eventful, I guess. So there's a little bit of a psyche involved in it, at least from my experience. So when I got the 3-bedroom, 2-bath, I definitely filled every room with objects, sometimes even more than I would like to have done. So my point is that, the minimalism part was sort of a major shift in thinking that didn't take overnight. I think it was a process that evolved because of my travels. And I think it emanated from the fact that when I go out there outside the country with a backpack, I come back actually happier with lesser things in possessions. And so I thought about that. Like, why is it that when I go out there with less things in my possession, I'm a little bit more fulfilled and more satisfied? And I realized that it's really the collection of experiences that enhances our life. And the objects, they're very minimal in terms of their role in terms of our own happiness. So I think that got me thinking over time about this ritual that I do where I go out of the country, I come home very happy and satisfied and full of joy. And then I come back home to my place full of things, and none of the things I have actually helped me in any kind of way. It didn't bring really the kind of certain level of joy that I got out of the experiences of hiking and seeing the world. So I think my subconscious mind finally eventually picked up on this, and over time it became more of a mantra in my head that I know for a fact that every time I go out there and come back, the experiences would be the one to add joy to my life. And the more I did that, the more I come home feeling like the objects in my home don't really matter and they don't really serve a purpose. Eventually, when I went out for a year, I came back to my house, and that's when it finally kicked in. This whole solidified idea that material objects don't really mean anything. It's really the experiences in life. So at that moment, I did not hesitate to sell all my stuff and sell the house actually. So I minimized. I realized at that point that I didn't really want to rely on objects to keep me happy, that I was going to shift my life and my thinking to focusing on experiences rather than the objects. So as a result, that whole idea manifested in physicality. I ended up selling my house. In 4 months, it went away. And then the objects, of course, had to go. I donated, I sold, I got rid of them as much as I can. And then eventually decided to even live in a smaller space. So I ended up living in a studio apartment. And that actually, I thought was the last place I'm going to live in before I leave the country. However, just by coincidence, a water leak happened at the building that caused my apartment to have issues and damage, and the landlord actually essentially asked me to leave. So when that happened, by coincidence, a friend of mine had a room available in his house. At first I thought, wow, moving to a room, I haven't done that since college. That would be such a major adjustment. And I thought maybe that may not be a good idea for me. Maybe I should stay in an apartment in my own private space. But then the more I thought about it, I realized, I'm saving a lot of money, and also it's minimizing more, and that could be a good thing. And lo and behold, I made the decision to move to a little room, and I couldn't be any happier because now I feel like everything that I need in my life in terms of material possessions they're all contained within the little bedroom that I have. I don't have any storage. Those are the only things that I have in my life that matter. And most of them are actually hiking gear and my work clothes. So a year and a half later, since I sold my house, I have no regrets. I don't miss the house. I don't miss the objects. I'm actually much, much happier because I feel my creativity just skyrocketed over time. My focus has become more on experiences, and I realized what I thought in the beginning turned out to be really true. So minimalism is going to be part of that whole process in terms of being able to financially support myself with this journey. I think that's something that really, really has to happen, because obviously I'm going to live a life of a more mobile person where I have to move around a lot. So it's not really practical for me to own a lot of things. Now, I guess the second point I wanted to make was the value of experiences over material things, which kind of goes hand in hand with minimalism. So those two are really sort of together in many ways. You minimize your objects because of the fact that you begin to value the experiences. The third point I want to add is that we need to get outside the box. The idea that you're only gonna work one career and work one job the rest of your life, and that would be the one and only income you're gonna have. So I think that's kind of an outdated idea. It's a very traditional concept. We've been raised by our parents, for one, to pick a career and to actually become a professional of sort. Usually your parents would want you to become a doctor or a lawyer, an accountant, something that's very, very stable and that pays well. And of course, that's not a bad thing if that's what you want. You want one career and that's what you love to do. But I think to become a nomad, you have to throw away that idea. You can't just be one thing. You cannot afford to just be one profession. Obviously, as a nomad, I have to quit the lawyer job because being a lawyer means I have to stay in one place. So because you're a nomad, one thing you have to think about is, what kinds of job can I have that would allow me to move around and travel and see the world? It does require a lot of creativity. It requires a lot of guts to take risks on things that are new to you for the most part. And it just takes a lot of courage to do so. So I think my one biggest advice is that you have to tap into the idea of diversifying your sources of income. And what I mean by that is, don't just be one kind of profession. Be different kinds. You have to come up with ideas of how you're gonna have your income on a monthly basis coming in on a more regular sort of schedule. For example, in my case, I can only speak for my own plans. My social enterprise peak explorations obviously would be my major project, the one that would give me the basis for my sources of income. It would be for marketing, it would be marketing the tracks, and the income that comes out of it would be enough to sustain my lifestyle. However, I don't want to rely just on that. I also would like to supplement that with other things, and some of the ideas have come about in my head would be, one, the travel blog that I have. That can also potentially earn me income in terms of monetizing the blog and getting sponsorships. Two, writing a book that you can sell. That's also some venture that I am exploring. And three, for me, is public speaking. Once I have a book and have everything up and running, public speaking is also a way for me to share my experiences and wisdom and thoughts about the travel lifestyle. And so I think that because I'm so passionate about it, I think that it's actually some project or some kind of work that I would really enjoy and would not even feel like it's a job. So public speaking also can potentially provide some finances in terms of just how to sustain my lifestyle. So these are just some of the ideas. I mean, there are actually plenty out there, and at some point I'd like to present this on another separate episode where I would interview a guest who has a different sort of way of sustaining their finances. There's also freelance writing that I can potentially tap into, but I'm just not there yet. There's all these other things. You can also be a web developer if you want. There's so many remote jobs you can do. There's volunteer work where you can just do some volunteer at a farm and you can stay for free. That also helps. And then there's also the house sitting and pet sitting services where you can stay in a house for free by taking care of the house or the pets. Like a house swap, there's a house swap. There's all these other ways that you can save in terms of your housing, which then helps in terms of the finances. So the bottom line about the nomadic lifestyle is that you do have to be creative. There's no doubt about that. There are plenty of ways, luckily, to do that. And I'm going to devote much more time on another episode about ways to basically cut down on the costs by virtue of, volunteering and working in some unconventional manner. So I want to just note that the creativity and diversity of income, they do have to be part of the process as well. Along with that, I would suggest that you have to also start becoming more mindful of your expenses. It's actually a given, because the only way for you to understand your financial condition is to actually know where the money is going, where the money is coming from. So it's not too early to start the habit of having a budget of some sort and knowing what your assets are and knowing what your expenses are. so that you know how to cut down on things. So that's very, very important. Now, in terms of other major aspects of this, I'd say one of the biggest things is that to become a nomad and sustain a less highly paid job or position, I'm gonna have to venture into living in cheaper places, countries that have lower cost of living. Obviously, I'm not going to be earning that much, so I would have to tap into places where I am able to afford rent or housing and food at a much cheaper price. For example, some of the places I've been looking at, which of course coincide with the places where I run my business, would be Tanzania, Mongolia, Nepal, Republic of Georgia, South Africa, Peru. Those places actually have a lower cost of living compared to America. And when I say lower cost, let me give you an example. In Tanzania, based on my research, you can easily get a one bedroom that ranges from $70 and up. And then utilities would cost you just about $20 a month. And then cell phone is totally much cheaper. It's probably going to be about $10 a month. So if you look at that actually would amount to about just maybe $5,000 a year in terms of expenses, or even $5,000 to $10,000 to $12,000 a year. So it just depends on how much you want to spend. If you really break it down, it does, your money can really go so far in terms of the dollars. Nepal is the same. That's another place. It's more or less the same kind of level as Tanzania. You can get an apartment for $100 a month, and then utilities are way cheap. Peru is the same, as well as Republic of Georgia. So along the way, I've been scouting all these places to kind of figure out what would be the budget and how it would look like. And it's inevitable when you're wanting this lifestyle that you have to be conscious of the budgeting and how much it was going to cost you to live in such country. Now, to complement the whole cost thing, you also have to consider living a healthy lifestyle. And the reason why is because, for one, medical expenses can probably be one of the most expensive things you have to pay for. So my advice is to actually focus on preventing illness and preventing any kind of issues, because that's the only best way for you to really save money in terms of medical bills. Now, if you keep yourself healthy, chances are you would not even have to see a doctor for a year. So my plan is to basically try to be more preventive. I want to eat healthy. I have actually changed my diet over time, and I do eat healthier compared to a few years back. I remain active. I do run and do hike, and I do yoga and meditation. So I really am trying to be more holistic and take care of myself before anything happens. And if anything happens, I know for a fact that I've taken myself well enough that I should be able to overcome those medical issues when they arise. So that's also a consideration in terms of finances, and I think it's a big thing, because obviously I'm not getting any younger every year. I'm gonna, have issues that just come with age naturally. Now, one other aspect I want to point out is that, which touches upon creativity as well, is you should be willing to explore your resources. Now, if you're used to buying Starbucks coffee for one, while being a lawyer or being a professional in your country, you can't really sustain that lifestyle when you go overseas and become a nomad. And for one, there may not even be Starbucks where you're going to, because obviously in my situation, that's really not a common thing. When I go to Republic, Georgia, there wouldn't be Starbucks around. And plus, I'm going to be in small towns and mountain regions. Starbucks just doesn't exist. So when I say explore your resources, you're going to have to be able to adapt and be able to make do of what you got in terms of resources. For example, I love coffee. So when I went to China, for example, there were no Starbucks around in the places that I went. I had to wake up in the morning and wake myself up with coffee, and it was very hard to find one. So there were no coffee shops in this one city that I went to, and so I had to be creative and had to go to a grocery store, look for see if I could get some bottled coffee of some sort, and so I just settled for that. So you have to be creative. You have to be willing to change your habits. You have to be willing to sacrifice some to be able to save money. So for my case, I have to accept the fact that Starbucks is just too expensive an expense for me. I can't afford Starbucks. And so if I want to like sustain my addiction to coffee, I'm going to have to find cheaper ways to do that. So the same way with your living condition, you know, you may live in a nice apartment in the city in New York or Washington DC. Well, if you want to be a nomad and you want to save money, you're gonna have to figure out ways to do that. You may have to stay in a hostel, share a room with a bunch of people. You may have to pet sit or house sit so you can live somewhere for free, or you have to work in a farm. There are a lot of ways, but maybe it might compromise your privacy, or it may be very well be the not the most convenient place for you, not the most comfortable because there's no heating sources just like in the US. So you have to be prepared for that kind of thing to be able to save. Now, one other aspect I want to note is practicing gratitude. I think the other mindset for this kind of journey, it would be very beneficial to know how to be thankful, because when you practice gratitude, you actually emphasize the good things in your life and the positive things versus the negative things. Like for example, if you're not in the ideal kind of living condition that you wish to be, if you're grateful for something, you are able to forget about the negative aspects of the experience. Like when I was in China, I had to go to a very remote mountain region. It was very cold. I had to like share a room with a bunch of people, and that was the only way you can actually find shelter and find a place to stay, is to have to share a room. Would I have liked to have privacy? Of course I would, but you know, it's a small sacrifice because you know, it's a very, very beautiful place to be in, and the scenery is just absolutely magical. The experience is great because you get to meet the locals. So I was very grateful for the opportunity to go to some unique place and experience something unique with the locals who, you know, they're actually from there and they never really leave the place. So you get to actually experience the authentic ways of living. So when I become grateful like that, I forget about the discomfort that I felt. I forgot about the discomfort that I felt from not having privacy. So to me, being positive and optimistic and grateful actually minimizes the issues or the things that I don't like about the experience. And it's a very good habit to have when you are downsizing, when you are focused on saving money and living a more transient lifestyle. Along with gratitude, I would also advocate for being able to appreciate simplicity. And what I mean by that is, when we're living in a big major city, we're used to spoiling ourselves with brand name materials or expensive outings, going to expensive concerts or shows just for entertainment purposes. I think as a nomad, for me, I have learned over time to enjoy quiet and stillness, to be able to meditate and to be able to enjoy just sitting on top of a hill and watching nature. Simplicity, that kind of thing. And the thing with that is that it doesn't cost much. You basically just walk around and enjoy yourself in nature. To be able to actually appreciate simplicity obviously will have its benefits in terms of cost, because being able to enjoy simple things in life would mean you're not going to spend too much money on it. So I think it's a very good way, a very good mental state to be in order to make sure that you're financially okay. So for me, the way I would live simply as a nomad obviously would be 1, the hiking part, 2, meditation, 3, just being able to to take a walk and talk to people and enjoy the company of other people with you, instead of having to spend money to be entertained. Such as, in my case, I wouldn't be able to afford skydiving or doing any of the tours. In a way, I have to just be able to make do of what I have and enjoy, the just much more slower pace of life. And luckily, I actually truly enjoy that. So if you're not the kind of person who can enjoy a slower pace, who seems to be a little bit more on the impatient side of things and more like the kind of person that wants to be stimulated, it's probably going to be a harder thing for you to adapt to simplicity. But that doesn't mean that you're not able to ever enjoy simplicity. You just have to learn to practice it, and you have to learn to make it a habit. So even when you're in a city and you're still working your 9 to 5, I think it's doable to practice gratitude and simplicity, because that's what I've already done in my life. Over time, I made my life simpler. I made my life simpler in a way that I don't really spend too much money on watching expensive shows or going out there and splurging on shopping. I basically enjoy my time alone. I meditate, I do yoga, I eat simply as well. I don't splurge on food either. So when I do that, in a way, it just makes it much easier for me to appreciate anything that's beyond the simplicity. And I become more appreciative when people actually would share experiences with me that I can't afford. For example, if I get invited to do things and it's not something that I would normally do, when I get to do it, I'm actually really excited and much more grateful, because it's, to me, I don't take it for granted. And finally, I just want to note one other mentality that I would recommend to have when you're going for an off the beaten path adventure and spending the rest of your life doing it. To be able to manage this whole experience, I've learned over time to trust life. And when I say that, that's probably one of the toughest things I have to do. And I'm still doing it. I'm still working on it. What I mean by trusting life is, you have to be optimistic, and you cannot just let hurdles and struggles defeat you and make you feel discouraged. I think that the biggest weapon I have, and the biggest way for me to make myself be successful in this, is the optimism that I have. When I say that, what I mean is, when you get a no for an answer from someone, you should not let that discourage you. You have to forge ahead. You have to keep going, because you know exactly what you want to do. You know exactly what your goals are. And no doesn't necessarily mean no. It's a redirection in life, and you should be okay with that. The biggest advice is to be able to face battles and hurdles and challenges with a very positive frame of mind. That's a very hard practice to incorporate in one's life, I think, because oftentimes by nature, when we don't get what we want, and if it doesn't go the way we want it, we look at this as failure, and we feel defeated. We feel bad and sad and disappointed. So that's what the ego will tell you. That's what by nature would happen. But if you really, really try to practice being grateful and being, just being appreciative and being optimistic, once you learn how to appreciate things in life and not take your life for granted, it's actually easier to look at losses and failures as not losses and failures, that they're actually just part of life, and that they're not necessarily bad things for you. And you can actually look at it more on a positive light and take them as lessons to make yourself better and to figure out a different way of achieving your goals. So with that, I think these are the points that I want to emphasize as part of preparing myself mentally to face the financial challenges of becoming a mountain nomad. If you have any additional thoughts, of course, feel free to share them. In the next few segments, I will then be discussing the specifics of the financial aspect. We will be talking about, how my financial is looking. For example, in US, I still have some of the expenses that I need to deal with. How am I going to overcome these things, and how am I going to be able to prepare myself? Where am I going to get my financial income from? And, what am I looking at in terms of housing and shelter and medical insurance and all these other expenses that I need to really, really, really hone in. And so I am looking forward to expanding on those issues because they're actually very important in terms of being able to manage my finances. In addition, I do have a guest who's going to be speaking with us once I present all the issues in my life in terms of the finances. I'm going to then go through the problem solving phase of it and ask for advice from experts. So stay tuned for all those episodes that are coming up on the financial aspect of the podcast. So as an aside, if you haven't subscribed to the newsletter, please do so you can get more updates on peak explorations and the blog. We do have trips coming up, including the all-women trek to Kilimanjaro. I also want to note that the podcast right now is being done in the Philippines. I'm actually not in the US now. I'm traveling. I'm actually with family because my mother passed away recently. And while I'm healing, I am actually focusing a lot of my energy on the podcast as well as Bronco Trekker and peak explorations in general. I'm very excited because there are going to be a lot of changes in my life which will resonate within the podcast itself as well as the Bronco Trekker blog as well as peak explorations. So stay tuned for all these developments coming up in my life and also for the websites. If you have any questions or additional information you want to share, feel free to do so. So until the next episode, take care and have a good next 2 weeks.